Morning Matters.
Perspectives from Southeast Asia.
Good morning, this is Arlene and you're listening to Durian ASEAN on our Monday Morning Matters. Today we are going to discuss on the Budget 2016 and how it will impact the younger generation of Malaysians. So here we have Ivanpal. He's a political secretary of YB Dato Keong, as well as Vince Tan. He's the Secretary General of the Progressive University of Malaya. So first of all, welcome to the studio.
Hi. Good morning.
How are you guys doing?
Good. Digesting the budget still.
So before we start talking about the budget, perhaps you can share a bit about what do you expect from the budget prior to the budget announcement?
Well, I think a lot of what I expected found its way into the budget, especially specific relief for the middle class. I'm part of the middle class myself, so I'm quite excited that for the first time, it is not just the bottom 40 or B40 as they're known that had specific initiatives targeted for them, but also that the M40 as we call it now, the middle 40, we like all these terms. The M40.
Thank goodness it's not M60.
Yeah. So we have the M40 as well, who have seen significant relief put out for them. But more importantly, I think we've also seen on housing, on youth development, something that we'll talk more about later. These are other initiatives as well that have found its way into the budget. So I think overall, I would say it's a very good budget and very much apt given the economic challenges we find ourselves in today.
And Vince?
For me, it's business as usual. Every year, the government tables the budget. Nothing revolutionary in the sense that.
But prior to this, prior to the budget announcement, what did you actually expect?
I mostly expect that it's going to be trying to mitigate the image of the Prime Minister in recent times with facing so much financial scandals and allegations. So and also seeking to address economic woes in our country. But as a youth, business as usual, looking at the budget, because there's nothing revolutionary. It's not like the government's introducing social security, food banks, or free tertiary education.
So it's not, really thinking outside the box if you're talking in budget term.
More or less.
So when you first saw the budget announcement on last Friday, a lot of people, in the media especially, they say that this is an election budget or Robin Hood budget, and some even go to the extent that it's actually a Rakyat's budget due to the fact that it increased the tax for the rich, and in fact it create more incentive for the middle class. But in your personal view, for the overview of the budget 2016, do you agree with that statement?
Well, for me, I think that it's a bit unfair characterization. I read the news reports as well where this term Robin Hood was used, which means taking from the rich to give to the poor.
Yeah, actually they borrow it from the Singapore's budget because they also did the same thing.
And Japan as well did the same thing. So this, it is not an isolated trend per se. But if you, I had the opportunity of reading a report, post-budget report by EY Advisory, and in fact they welcome this approach, because if you look at it, in comparison to many other countries, especially in Europe, US and others, our highest tax rate is still pretty much lower. In the UK it's 49% for those earning in the highest bracket. So in that sense, it is a timely move in the right direction, because I think we need to widen our revenue base, and we need to ensure that most of our income comes from tax revenue and not oil and gas and other sources of income that are not sustainable in the long term. So in that sense, I don't see it as a Robin Hood budget. I don't make 1 million a year, so maybe those making 1 million a year may.
If it's not a Robin Hood budget,
I think it is a balance. You see, the budget is a political document that encompasses the government's vision, and also it is a spending supply bill to ensure the government is funded for the year. But beyond that, it is also a policy document. So in the sense that the policy of the government, to me, in my view at least, is the right one, because what's most important is that everyone must pay their share for growing the nation.
I see. And Vince, do you agree with that?
I think that it would be unfair to categorize them according to the election budget, budget. I see more of a Najib's budget because
Najib's budget.
because each prime minister, they have their own vision, they have their own ideals. The budget is a way to portray their vision and the direction that he's heading for this country. So with regards to this Najib's budget, academics criticize it in a sense, like Dr. Muhammad Abdul Khalid, he says that Najib's vision is to have a high income nation, like rather than a Vision 2020. But you see this budget lacks the mechanisms to head towards the high income nation.
And what is the mechanism that we should have to create that path towards high income nation?
You look, the increase of minimum wage is not significant enough. I think wages is the most essential part for high income nation, because cost of living is getting high. It's only with better wages we can cover those costs of living, as well as increase of disposable income to sustain domestic consumption.
So what are you saying is the budget doesn't really address the economic structural problem that is happening in this country, and of course a huge chunk of it is wages.
Yes, and if you look at the wages that citizens have nowadays, it doesn't grow proportionate to the cost of living. Right? If the most simple example is the price of chicken rice on the street, right? Of 5 ringgit, it goes up to 5.50, and now 6 ringgit. It shows that cost of living is going up. But if salary wages does not go up proportionate to it, people will feel the pinch because it will reduce their disposable income for a normal man on the street.
Interesting. Talking about cost of living, which is an interesting observation even in the Prime Minister department, because as you all know, prior to the Budget 2016 announcement, the Najib administration actually did a survey, a very simple online survey on what actually is impacting the most when it comes to the Malaysian rakyat is facing right now, and cost of living were the highest in terms of percentage of I guess in comparison with other problems that we have in this country. First of all, why cost of living is such a huge problem? Is it a global phenomenon, or is it just because the way we manage our economy is not good enough?
I think I agree partly with what Win says vis-a-vis cost of living is an issue, but I don't agree with the characterization that some say some use the hamburger index, some use the chicken rice index. I would use the CPI.
And what is the consumer price index?
Yeah, the consumer price index. Yeah, but I agree with you that inflation remains a concern. But the government's ability to intervene within the market is also limited. At the same time, when on the issues of wage and minimum wage especially, we have seen an increase, and in fact the business community was very unhappy because a lot of them were arguing that this will make them less competitive. And a lot of my friends were in business as well.
What they disagree about?
They disagree because the cost will increase with the minimum wage increase. But I think the government did the right thing by pushing ahead with the minimum wage increase. And the National Wage Council made its recommendations, and the government accepted it.
But
so
about the argument on the cost of wages, but in Malaysia, if you really look at the percentage of wages comparison to the wages of not the wages but the profit that the employees get, actually employees get a huge proportion of the chunk of revenue. So how can an increase of wages would reduce their capability in being competitive?
The backbone of the Malaysian economy is actually small and medium industries that are actually feeling the pinch from the cost of increase in minimum wage, because we are very much a wage intensive model, and we rely heavily on foreign workers and things like that. So that is where I think the business community itself must start to make the changes.
So when you mention business community, you're actually referring to the SME industries.
Yeah, which is 90% of the business community per se. Then you have the very, very big companies that do very well, and I think obviously people who work in these companies get paid reasonably better than their counterparts in working in smaller firms or businesses. So that is why, in fact, my boss in his policy address to the party conference proposed a wage top-up scheme similar to what Singapore has done, where in the next 5 years, all those earning less than 2,500 will have their salaries increased over a period of 5 years. The contribution will come from the employer and from the government per se, and this will actually help address the wage concern that people have. But of course, this is not, I would say, a policy without controversy as well. A lot of business people are going to say, well, how can I do it? How can I factor it into my business model? So I think sometimes we must find a balance, and I think that is what the Prime Minister, and I don't think it's fair to call it a Najib's budget. It's a budget, I think, trying to address all the concerns across the board. We can be very idealistic, and look at isolated comments or research, but we must actually understand the whole process. And this country has great diversity of views across the board. And I think most importantly, the Prime Minister is trying to find the right balance between rewarding, help assisting the lower income groups, assisting the middle income group, but at the same time ensuring economic sustainability and that we spend within the deficit target that we have set, so that we have a balanced budget by 2020, so investors have confidence in us, that there is sound economic management in this country.
And actually, your point of view about the SMEs concern is a fair view, because SMEs has not been getting the most of the economic pie if you comparison in terms of quota between how much the MNC gets and how much the SME gets. Talking about cost of living, and I know most of the problem occurs because of people not getting enough wages to spend when the prices of things goes up, so they don't even have money to save at the end of the month. So how can the government actually address cost of living from a youth point of view?
I always believe in government interventions. I do not agree with the fact that free market will rectify itself. Alright, you see, minimum wage is a moral argument. Alright, the moral argument for minimum wage is so a person has a basic decent salary enough to make ends meet. As long as he has basic necessities, food, shelter, clothing, these are the most essential parts that we need to cover first. But if the inability of a person to guarantee this, you can say that they are squeezing the people. So for me, instance, I spend minimum 20 ringgit a day. So there's food and transport. So maybe around 620 per month. This is excluding toiletries, home rental, and water, electricity. So these are the costs of living we students have to face. Scholarship money is never enough. So cash injections from parents are the ones that help us get us through university. So what we want to see is the increase in wages and also the reduction of cost of living, so we have more disposable income. Because more disposable income.
Reduce cost of living. Do you see cost of living as a result of a global phenomenon, or as a result of the government mismanaged the economy?
I think it will be the government mismanaged. You see, there are many wastages that in the administration of the government itself. Some departments don't practice open tender. You can take university for instance. Once a project or tender is given to one party, alright, the party wants to make more money out of it, and later opens other tenders to other people. Alright, so the middleman concept is the ones that increases costs of the food in university. So we need to interfere in this part, eliminate the middleman, and the same concepts has to go on a national level. Besides that, there are many wastages that can be cut off, spending on big projects and all that. We need to be ready for any type of possible economic woes in the future, because things are not looking good at the moment. Stop big projects and review all government contracts. Right, this is a part of the government. Review all government contracts, ask for discounts. Right, because on projects and review those contracts that are feel is not favorable to the people.
Good business practices is also part of the way to reduce cost of living.
More accurately, is good governance.
Okay, but when it comes to wages, I understand the concern of SME unable to keep up with, I guess, financial bracket that they can afford in terms of hiring people and hiring at a rate that is higher than the current rate. But what about MNC setting the example, or putting a higher minimum wage for MNCs rather than having a blanket minimum wage to all companies.
Yeah, but I think back to the point earlier, it's quite unfair to say government contracts affects cost of living. I think that's a stretch beyond any measure. Cost of living is a global phenomenon. Singapore, which is one of the most prosperous countries in the world, has an issue of cost of living. India, there are riots over onions. I mean, it is across the board. Intervention, that is why we have a subsidy system. That's why you have BRIM and others to ensure that it is targeted. Previously, the guy driving S400 and the guy driving Myvi would enjoy the same amount of subsidy. So I think the Prime Minister, and who's also the Finance Minister, is very brave to take on all these issues in the past 5 years to ensure that the amount of wastage when it comes to subsidy alone is reduced. As for others, governance issues, I agree with Vince that things can be better, and that is why we are endeavoring to make it better. And if you look if you actually read through the Prime Minister's budget speech, there's a special mention on the MECC and giving it the powers it needs to hold government agencies accountable. And I can tell you that despite what people say out there, being in government, I am heavily scrutinized from my claims, my expenditure and others. So it's a bit unfair sometimes to just look at perspective, because we are in the system, we understand it better.
So you say you're heavily scrutinized. Is there an institution body that actually scrutinizes?
Yeah, the finance department within Jabatan Perdana Menteri will look at everything we claim, and everything we do. We have to explain ourselves. So I think that's a good thing.
Are you accountable to the Ministry of Finance or to?
No,
the
I'm accountable as a member of the administration. I'm obviously accountable to Prime Minister, because I'm not an MP. If I'm an MP, then obviously I'm accountable to Parliament. But I think we shouldn't get into that issue of accountability in the strict sense. But what I'm saying is that at least there are efforts being made to ensure transparency across the board. And you ask all other civil servants or political secretaries, they would attest to the same. Now back to wages, the government hires about 10% of the workforce, and the entry level pay in government actually is a lot better, because I started off as a grade 41 officer 4 years ago. 6 years ago, and I'm quite old now.
Wow. and how old are you?
And then actually, friends of mine who went into the working for MNCs or SMEs or even in their professional fields, law and others, were actually paid less than I was. Now, I think the burden of raising wages cannot fall on the government. We cannot pass a law tomorrow that says all companies must double up their salaries.
But when you have, for example, the garbage collector, which is hired by Indah Water, which is a local private company that is actually commissioned under the government, pays 900 ringgit.
1,000 now under minimum wage.
So, it hasn't been enforced yet.
Yeah.
How can you explain that? And they have families to feed.
I think that is exactly the point. But then again, a lot of these things are set by market conditions as well.
These are not market condition, because Indah Water is a monopoly.
No.
There's no competition.
I think we should not fall into the trap of taking one example. Because if you look at Indah Water, it is a private, not Indah Water, it's actually Alam Flora that gets garbage. Indah Water deals with sewage. So all of these bodies, yeah, they are private bodies, but they have government contracts. I don't know I don't know how it's drafted, so I cannot speak on something I have no knowledge of. But what I can say at least is that across the board in the budget, what you saw is the Prime Minister giving an increment to all those bottom rung civil servants, yeah, especially those with who do not possess a degree or diploma per se. So this bottom group we're actually looking at their concerns. More importantly, I think the private sector must step up to the plate, and they must work with.
They must step up through a policy commitment.
We have the wage council. I've been saying for a long time that the ambit of the wage council should be enlarged, not just to talk about minimum wage, but talk about livable wage. And I think we look at minimum wage per se. I agree it is less than satisfactory, but this is the best we can do in the present circumstances, balancing all the factors that we have to, at the same time looking at the economic situation we find ourselves in as well. But more importantly, that is why you have aid for for children from poor families. You have BRIM. You have all other kinds of assistance. So that's what the government is already doing. But the private sector is not playing its part, I feel. It's not being a sincere player in working hard with the government to look and say, okay, where do we want to be in 2020?
Okay. Perhaps your response before we take a break?
I think the fact that I do not disagree with Ivanpal in the sense that I don't think that it's a market force to be blamed. The burden of running a country is always on the government, and especially I always believe in government interventions, like what I said before. You can vote out a government if it doesn't do well, but you can't vote out the businesses. So the check and balance from the people has to come from government. From the people have to check and balance the government. You can't check and balance businesses. In the sense that business dominating the economy, controlling the economy, in a sense, is very unfair because the all prices.
But what is your proposal for businesses to be checked?
In a way, government has to intervene more.
Like how?
Policies, minimum wage, and employment policies as well, and creating more jobs for locals rather than taking foreign labor. You see a lot of issues.
But you know, government intervention like the Ling Guan Ing issue, where you say he made a stand that you cannot employ foreign workers for cooks. You should employ only locals.
Yes.
But that sounds a bit xenophobic.
Yeah. The human rights aspect allowed many criticisms towards that decision, but it's good for the Penang people itself, because I come from Penang. The main issue about food is the quality of food at the end of the day. So as long as the cooks, the hawkers, they want to maintain a certain level of standard, as well as creating job opportunities for the local people, because this will allow them to have income and encourage domestic consumption and domestic spending in the Penang economy.
So in other words, you want to have a policy where the local come first when it comes to job opportunities. But isn't that kind of, I would say, go against the current global economy, which is about globalization? I mean, you cannot stop people from the outside to find job opportunities in Malaysia or in anywhere in the world.
I agree with that. I think as we move towards an ASEAN community, we're going to have a lot of movement similar to Europe. So we cannot always hope on intervention per se, because then
state protectionism.
Or state protectionism, because actually then you end up being a very socialist communist state, which we are not. So being a progressive union, I agree where your political views lie. But at the same time, we have to be practical. And the government's ability to intervene in the market, we've been intervening on a lot of things. So economists say we should intervene less. Let things be decided by market forces. So there's always this challenge of finding the right balance. And I use the word balance a lot, because in the end of the day, it is about how you run a country. It's about balancing all the competing interests and then letting what is best come up. So at the same time, we're giving enough room to businesses when it comes to their policy direction. We are ensuring that we do not smother them, to kill them, so that they are unable to innovate and contribute in the long term. But at the same time, we have a commitment to the workers.
Anyway, we will take a short break.
Sure.
We'll continue our discussion about Budget 2016.
Monday Morning Matters. Perspectives from Southeast Asia.
Good morning, this is Arlene. You're back with me on our Monday Morning Matters, of course, with our two speakers, Ivanpal, Political Secretary of YB Dato Keong, as well as Vince Tan, Secretary General of the Progressive University of Malaya, on our topic, Budget 2016, how it will impact the younger generation. So, earlier on, we discussed a host of different issues arises from the budget, also circumstances that Malaysia is facing right now. But when it comes to younger generation, besides cost of living, what are the main issues or challenges that young Malaysians are facing right now? Perhaps we can have our Vince Tan here to share.
I would like to start with two aspects, NGOs as well as sports. The first is regarding to the 930 million we have for empowering youth community and NGOs. 160 million is allocated for NGOs. I would like to highlight the aspects of the legal part of it. Many civil societies are not registered under the Societies Act due to certain restrictive provisions, and such civil society organizations are registered under the Companies Act to avoid the restrictions under the Societies Act. Some don't register at all. I run a student movement in University Malaya. We do not register because if we register, we will be governed by this University and University College Act, which restricts our financial powers. All money will have to go into the university's account, and when we want to use this money, we have to ask. We have no financial autonomy over it. So the non-registration of societies does not make them illegal. There are court cases saying that it's only illegal when the Home Ministry declares it as illegal and subject to judicial review and all that. So I would like the part of this funding for NGOs. How do we help those civil societies which contribute so much to the Malaysian community?
So your question about the budget for civil society is you don't understand how the mechanism works. The government doesn't really, lay out its plan.
Yes.
But you agree that the government is providing a path for civil society to, organize events and all that, or activities through the government's budget.
The money is there, but the process is what we need to look at. How to liberalize the process, how to facilitate activities. Because civil society does help the government in one way or another, empowering the citizens to take part in activities that are good for nation building. I like to take the next step towards sports. I think funding for and supporting sports is always a good thing, but delivery of performance is one thing that we need to look at. The culture. Okay, I like to talk about football because I'm a big football fan. It's very patriarchal and boyish in nature. It's only there's a culture saying that only boys play the sport, so there's less development for football for women. So we need mechanisms to create or change this culture, make it and invest in certain areas that have never been invested before. And I think the budget needs to address this, changing cultures. Like maybe football clinics for women and all that. This is good for nation building. Like I'm a supporter of Chelsea Football Club. They're not doing well in the Premier League, but the ladies team are doing very well.
Interesting point. I think at the end of the day, it's not just about the money. It's how you use the money and how you actually
change the culture.
Want to expand the money's value. But other issues that the younger generation today are facing, especially the youth in the urban areas, when it comes to the cost of ability to buy a house, for example.
I think that I'm the generation that will not be able to afford a house. We will be contented instead of staying rental, because we rent households, because we don't want to get tied up with the future, any bubble bursting and all that. So the most important thing right now is saving, like increasing our disposable income, saving just for the rainy weathers to come.
Right now it's really hard for you to save money. I mean, not just you, but younger generation in general.
Yes.
And why is that so?
Besides cost of living, the way youngsters are living also, that needs to be addressed. If you're living in urban areas, the Starbucks culture, the cinema culture, everything is part and parcel of being a teenager. You can't take that away, but whereas as time progresses, cost of living increase, disposable income reduces. So for us students who are not working, the burden is actually on our parents. So each time I go back to Penang, there's the scolding from the parents. Each time you want your cash injections. So it goes back to the main issue of a discussion earlier, the cost of living and all that. But I believe that besides the having minimum wage and all that, human capital needs to be invested. So the next step is education. I do not want to see education being a form of class stress, segregation or class struggle, where only the rich can go abroad. The local people, the poor and middle income families.
Do you think the government has not done enough in terms of providing more subsidies and scholarship for those who are not able to afford education for themselves?
Scholarship is there. A lot of money is actually pumped in, but what we are actually interested is a quality tertiary education in our local universities. We do not want to create a culture where good rich students, they can go overseas and have better quality education than the local universities, because local universities we face problem. Brain drain even happens. Academics are leaving. why lousy pay, don't like the work culture, and because of the administration bureaucracy. All these are very important. And besides that, quality tertiary education needs academic freedom, and academic freedom is always a problem in local universities. Students are not
So
taught to
there's a host of other structural issues that needs to be addressed in academic, in the education
this
sector.
is not just per se on the fundings of the university per se, but the culture. How do you change the cultures that has been practiced in local universities and all that? For those rankings, the factors that gauges a university ranking, research, facilities, employability, these are all criteria to help boost a university ranking. These are aspects that we need to look at to change the culture of the university.
So I want to move on to you, because I think when it comes to challenges of youth, you might not be the right person to answer it, because,
I also say that
because you don't fall into the bracket that Vince falls into. But what I want to address, I want you to address is, do you think the current budget, at least for the next year, would be able to address the host of structural issues that Vince said just now?
But I must state with a proviso, I'm under 35. So I speak with some authority. But as I said, time passes so fast. If you look at the first iPhone and the current one, you actually come to realize that advances are quite remarkable. But now Vince has brought up a host of issues. I do not think that the budget per se is the one all solution.
Obviously, because this is part of the RMK 11.
There's also a higher education plan, transformation plan that's going to be undertaken. I think a large part of it is also to ensure universities make an effort to go out there and seek more funding on their own.
Is it really propelling towards the direction of addressing at least the very basic problem that Vince just now mentioned?
I think it is also one of thinking and one of cultural views that people may have. I think the issue of academic freedom and other things that have been raised, yes, there are some concerns that even I would say I have been troubled about, but at the same time, I do not think it is one of a culture of fear or repression. The picture that's being painted is quite inaccurate. But I think more importantly, we can do better, and we must. And I think we have to accept. I, for one, believe that we should look at rankings. And yes, our universities are not up there, and that is the challenge for them. And that is why we've put in the transformation plan in place, because we have to endeavor to be the best. And I also agree that scholarships, for example, we give out thousands and thousands we spend billions on scholarships a year. And I think these are good, but a lot of the scholars must come back and they must serve here, because you've got the opportunity to go abroad. And I think that kind of transfer that will take place will be good for the country.
I want to interject you about education costs, because the recent survey done by an international organization that Malaysia is one of the top 10 countries that have the highest cost of education in the world. Do you agree with that?
Well, I've not seen the report, but again, to make a comment on something I've not seen would be not very responsible as well. But at the same time, I think the best way to look is how much we spend per student. So this year, the budget of the Higher Education Ministry has been slashed by 2.5 billion. 2.4. So I think this will be also an incentive to universities to be more efficient in the way they use money. I think there's a lot of money out there, but it's not being used efficiently. That goes back to the governance issue that Vince raised up much earlier in his comment. But in the same breath, I think we were talking actually on youth and what are the concerns. I think to move into that and to answer your question, Arlene, I think the big problem today is home ownership, and that's why we have brought in Prima. We've brought in the first homeowners grant, where we help you buy your house. The government helps you buy your first home, which is again very revolutionary. And second is that actually for those who do not qualify for the normal loans, because of banks have their own rules and things like that, we have the Malaysian Building Society that you can go to.
I want to interject you on the house ownership, because if you remember a couple of months back when Khazanah Research Institute published a document about their research on home ownership. They actually made an interesting, observation. For example, in the Philippines, just because you are a private sector doesn't mean that you won't make a profit by creating more low-cost home, because it seems like when it comes to building low-cost houses for the ordinary Malaysians, it falls under the government's shoulder. What about the private sector? Because you represent the business community, do you think the private sector should also step up their game?
I represent government, but I try to speak up for all. But yes, I think I read the Khazanah report, and it was actually quite telling that they actually looked at the disposable income and then the median home cost of owning a home, and then they had a calculation done. So like in KL, I think it's 4 or 5 times of your wage.
In fact, it's more expensive to buy a house in Malaysia.
So that is why I think Khazanah research was very apt. So we understand there is a problem, so that is why it's being addressed through Prima and others.
But do you think it should fall on the government's
but at the same time,
shoulder only?
That's coming to that. Every housing project must also have a low affordable home a component. That means if you're putting up a beautiful project somewhere, you have to, part of your CSR is, as a developer, is also to ensure low cost or affordable homes. We shouldn't call it low cost homes, because I think it's a bit of a misnomer. We should call it affordable homes, because they must be at a level acceptable to those who are going to live in them. So at the same time, you have Prima, you have Project Perumahan Rakyat or People's Housing Scheme, and then you have low cost or affordable homes. Sorry, now I'm making the same mistake. Affordable homes as well.
Is this amended?
from developers as well. So across the board, I think we're addressing that. I think car ownership, this is another big issue, but I think with the MRT and LRT coming up, that would actually improve connectivity. But I think we should also look at Johor wants to implement a bus rapid transit for JB. I think we should move in that direction. Penang has Rapid Penang, so at least the urban pockets become a lot more livable when it comes to public transportation. So I think these are what youths look for today. They look for good jobs, they look for good paying jobs, they look for homes, they look for good public transport. So we are addressing all of this in stages.
So what you're saying that it's a process, and to achieve
I don't think one budget's going to solve everything. I mean, it'd be foolish to think so. But it is, if you look at the steps started from when the Prime Minister became the Finance Minister in 2008 up to now, 2015, so he's delivered 7-8 budgets now actually. You actually come to see that there is a clear idea. I mean, you must look at all the documents in harmony. You just don't look at one or two. So despite the price of oil only at 40 odd US dollars a barrel, so revenue is collapsing. So we have GST to compensate for that, and then you're moving into a high income direction, and you're addressing a lot of these concerns that the younger Malaysians have.
Okay. Mentioning about GST, I think that's one of the bigger issue that a lot of the younger generation are not happy about. As we all know that Petronas is hoping to cut its contribution to 9 billion ringgit next year for the budget 2016, from an estimated 26 billion ringgit this year. Correct. So in terms of revenue for next year's budget, actually half of it will be from GST, interestingly. I know the younger generation are not really happy about GST, but do you think it's a necessary evil, Vince?
Any form of taxation is something that everyone would say no, because because you see
taking money from your pocket.
That's
no
the thing.
Going to be happy.
Generally, but you need to understand that taxation is a source of income for the government. Too much tax exemption also, the government doesn't earn money. You need those tax to fund welfare policies, to give back to the people, to redistribute wealth. Taxation is a social contract where people pay, in exchange for protection from the state. So we're looking for that protection from the state. How does the state protect us economically? We need certain things that has never been done before. Why I always say this budget is the same old thing, nothing revolutionary, because we don't take that revolutionary steps. Like, you look at certain countries, they introduce social security, food banks. You look at the issue of poverty in Malaysia. I can invite Mr. Ivanpal here to join me during Sundays at Jalan Panggung, where we do this Dapur Jalanan soup kitchen. You see the people.
This is for the homeless people.
Sleeping on the streets. Right? You see that Kuala Lumpur is not as beautiful as people say, with the twin towers and all that, and as if Malaysia is only in PJ and Bangsa. No, there are people sleeping in the streets, and there's inequality. And I think a quote from Kamal Saleh, the real inequality today is not racial inequality, racial inequality, but it's intra-racial inequality.
So you have very rich Malay or very rich Chinese, and very poor Chinese and very poor Malay.
Yes, poverty knows no race. So I think Malaysia needs to step up on this effort in eradicating poverty, because
Good that you're mentioning about inequality, because I think that's one of the issue that I'm not sure the current budget really address it. Perhaps you can shed more light. Do you think it really address inequality in this 2016 budget?
There is allocation for Bumi Putras, right? But there is a portfolio that I'm not very expert on. But affirmative action has always been there in our country, and affirmative action has a certain target, a certain goal. We need to review whether has we achieved that certain goal, and if not, what can we do? Because at the end of the day, the affirmative action is to eradicate poverty.
With BRIM, for example, do you think it can at least reduce the stress of monthly expenditure?
I would say BRIM encourages spending, right, but not so much on the part of reducing your cost of living. You see how you use the BRIM, right? I stay with a landlord. My landlord, he receives BRIM. He's one person who doesn't spend too much on other goods, other consumer items, only basic food, and that he's finding it hard to make ends meet. So BRIM doesn't solve a problem, but it's more or less to stimulate people to buy more in the consumption of the domestic economy. So I think goes back to the two issues that we have been discussing just now: wages as well as cost of living. If you can reduce the cost of living and increase wages, people have more disposable income. It's all about how do I put it? That cost minimization equals to profit maximization. So we need to look at reducing the cost of living.
So you actually disagree with BRIM?
Yes, yeah.
So
the money can actually be used to fund other types of policies which encourage reduce the reduction of cost of living.
So if you don't have BRIM, which is instant cash handouts every month, what can the government do to somehow reduce the monthly stress?
I think the government needs to do something revolutionary, such as social security, and that will win them popular support. But the issue of funding these types of
Define social security in the Malaysian context.
Alright, for instance, if a person is jobless, alright, he can claim a certain amount from the government. For a subject, if you fulfill certain conditions, you must find jobs. You must how do I put it? Accept certain recommendations in your career.
So employment, unemployment
yes,
funds.
we address that issues. And another way to reduce cost of living, especially for the B40 food banks, maybe we're looking for this type of revolutionary aspects to win the heart of the people on moral grounds. So I think the aspects of the government needs to look at that rather than portraying the same way of spending each
year. But what about you have a BRIM where the money can only be spent on certain products? Does it really resemble the food bank concept?
Maybe, but
because there have been talks by policymakers to make it more targeted BRIM rather than cash.
Well, previously I think the whole BRIM idea was a copy of Penang. Again, starting to give cash and handouts to the people, old people, university students, and to appreciate the people. Once you have budget which has surplus, you have more money and all that, you start spending on all these social welfare policies. So in Penang, we have this Partners Against Poverty program where the basic salary is the poverty line 770. Any families who does not earn 770 per household, the government tops up from it. So where does the income comes? All those 20 cents you pay from the plastic bag as well as contributions from the private sectors. So these are a type of policies which brings the people at the heart. Alright, and I think the Malaysian government should look at that aspects, and it will gain them support. Right.
Okay. Your response to this?
Well, I think quite a lot has been touched on. I think first of all, if you look at a social safety net, we actually do have one. We have e-Kasih, where single mothers, families earning less than the minimum requirement actually get a series of aids and things like that. So the Partners in Poverty program, in fact, if I want to be cheeky, I can say it's a copycat of what the federal government has been doing for the last 50 years.
So everyone is copying everyone.
So I think BRIM is right in the sense that it's targeted. It goes to those who really need it. So subsidies are not wasted. And actually cash transfers are popular. Even Taiwan does it. And even Singapore has a system of cash transfers to address the concern of low-income groups.
He highlighted the unemployment fund. Do you think it's necessary?
Now, you see, if you look at statistics-wise, I mean, we cannot look at things in isolation. We actually are near to full employment. Our unemployment rate is about 3%. And actually, those who are unemployed, actually are able to go for job training skills programs for them to improve their skill set. Secondly, they actually are entitled to get aid as well from Jabatan Kebajikan Masyarakat, right? So the aid is available for them, but obviously it's not at a level which is not a salary because unemployment benefits are never a salary. But at the same time, I think as a growing economy, we have to address these social concerns, but at the same time we should encourage employment as opposed to subsidizing unemployment. I think that's more important, and that is why 2 million jobs have been created in the last 5 years in Malaysia, taken up by Malaysians. So the focus should be actually on ensuring proper livable wage. So that is why you see the minimum wage being increased to 1,000 ringgit. So these are all measures that are already in place. Maybe people are not fully aware of it. Maybe the communication is not good enough. So maybe programs like this help for us to come up. And last one on GST, I think the fact that oil price is at $45 a barrel, and the fact that we have a significantly higher cost of production than just say the countries in the Middle East, quite naturally Petronas' ability to contribute to our national coffers will be reduced. But I think it is also an opportunity for Malaysia to diversify its revenue base. I agree that taxation is a social contract. You must pay tax. Nobody likes to pay tax. That is why many years ago the Americans had a tea party because of tax. So more importantly, the focus now should be on spending the money well, spending the money wisely, ensuring that all communities or the M40, the B40 are taken care of. Yeah. And this is
but do you think GST is a necessary evil? Because you can see
quite necessary.
There are countries that completely do away with GST, and they actually have money to fund for infrastructure projects, for public sector projects.
But you see GST is implemented in close to 80% of countries abroad. So we can't say that 80% of countries are doing something wrong. And this includes Europe, America, Australia, Singapore. All these countries have GST. The countries that actually don't have GST are countries that, for example, Brunei, where you have oil revenue, Saudi Arabia, oil revenue. So, but at the same time, what's the good thing of GST that people miss out is that companies that previously were never paying tax, 400,000 of them, have now been forced to register and pay tax. So we are cutting down, we are minimizing the loopholes. We are minimizing evasion. We are compelling people to give out receipts. So it is a process not only on simply purely revenue collection, but more importantly, GST actually is also compelling people to have more integrity when they do their business.
So it's a way actually as a check and balance for businesses in a way.
Exactly. So a lot of businesses who make copious amounts of money, but they always find a way of declaring a loss because of creative accounting. They can't do that because GST is a output-based tax. It's based on your sales. You have to give a receipt for every sale that you make. It's all computerized within the system. You cannot run away. So this is a hallmark of Malaysia moving into the face of a developed nation. In fact, now India, which is a very big market, every state has its own taxation policy, is also going for GST because that's the best way to ensure they stop the black, they call it black money there, and also leakages and things like that.
I think
there are other alternatives, other taxes, other besides
talking
GST.
about other tax, I want to add on. This is my final question. I think the elephant in the room here is, of course, when it comes to the rich, usually they are the ones who pay the least tax in terms of proportion, in terms of the proportion of they pay comparison to, the poor. But do you think this budget actually addresses how the rich should pay more in terms of their share of the tax?
I don't think so. And more or less, they are still there. They are still able to survive, sustain themselves. Of course. So the issue is more on the lower classes, right? The B40, the middle class. There's always the issue, and they are the majority. The wealth monopolization happens on top. So how do we tax the rich and instead of taxing the poor? GST is regressive in nature, in the sense that the more you earn, the lesser you feel the pain. Alright, the tax is on those people who buys those consumption items. Of course, everyone buys it, but the fact that the pinch is felt on the lower classes. Yeah. So there we need to be brave to explore other options besides the GST. Alright, there's inheritance tax we can consider, capital gains tax, which actually taxes those who are rich rather than taxing those who are poor.
So diversify the taxation.
We have capital gains tax, real property gains tax. We have it, and I think when you talk about GST, I think you must understand the more you consume, the more you pay, and the rich will always consume more, so they are paying more GST as opposed to those on lower income groups. Furthermore, you also have a lot of products that are exempted from GST as well. Now you have baby milk and dal and kolomi and few other things. So, and most importantly, actually off-the-counter medications are zero-rated GST as well. Essential items, essential food items are also zero-rated GST. So, I think to say that GST hits disproportionately the lower income group may not be entirely accurate, but GST has of course taken a toll. There is an adjustment that has to take place, but you see, one thing we cannot forget. There are 13 million Malaysians who work. Only about 1.4 million pay tax. It's not sustainable where your tax base only comes from 10% of the population. Everyone has to pay their share towards nation building, and that is why GST, in a way I look at it, I'll dare say, is a way of democratizing the tax system in this country to ensure everyone pays their part.
So in essence, you agree with GST and how it will actually be half of the country's revenue?
I'm a very strong supporter because I think it's the right decision. It's never popular to bring in tax.
But is it even sustainable? I mean, you look at it.
It is a consumption
half of the country's income will be coming from tax rather from profit or production based revenue. So I think in essence you have to tax because some part of the government's revenue comes for it, but how much of the proportion revenue should be from tax? I think that's the question that a lot of us might need to review it.
No, I think the right way is tax, because the alternatively is to have for example oil revenue, which not all countries have, and then the other one is to raise debt, which is to borrow money, which is not sustainable as well. So governments always raise their revenue through taxation. It's been like it for the last 2,000 years. It's not about to change now. But more importantly, I think we have a diverse tax structure now. We're not purely relying on income tax. We also have GST. We have other forms of tax as well, excise duty, import duty, things like that. So again, the revenue base actually is significantly diversified, hence more sustainable, as opposed to having Petronas coughing up 50% of the national budget every year. Is that the right move? I do not think so.
So before we end the show, final message, comment, just within
We can't rely
half a
solely
minute?
on taxation. We have to venture to other aspects of earning. Malaysia is gifted with natural resources, petroleum, timber, and all that. But one thing that Malaysia is also gifted is it's a beautiful country. It's tourism. Alright, these are the parts of economies that we do not need to invest in too much on raw materials, and this is not encouraging to pollution or whatsoever that damages the environment. Tourism needs to be emphasized. Alright, what we need to play to the key strength that we have in our country, and I think that the budget for the future, not this just to the 2016 one, should emphasize on those sectors which are actually more profitable to bring in money from outside the country inside this country, rather than taxing your own people per se.
So your conclusion of the budget 2016?
Well, I think I go on to what I said at the start, the outset, is that it is a balanced document addressing the concerns of the B40 and the M40, but at the same time it also puts the nation on the path towards high income by 2020. But it also recognizes the economic challenges we face currently, and there is the right policy recipe to deal with all of these challenges. You can never make everyone happy. I think that's the first rule I've learned the hard way in politics. You can never make everyone happy. But what we can do is that provide enough help and assistance for those who need it. And I think that is why you see BRIM increasing and the minimum wage increasing. So these are steps in the right direction. And I think more steps will be taken in the coming years, so that when we achieve high income nation by 2020, we actually enjoy high income. And I think that's the challenge. Thank you.
With that, thank you very much, everyone.